The silence was deafening. At Madison Square Garden, 20,000 people held their breath as Whitney Houston lay motionless on the stage floor, her elegant black gown spread around her like dark water. For 15 terrifying seconds, the voice, the woman whose instrument had moved mountains and touched souls across the globe, appeared lifeless under the blazing spotlights. Security rushed toward the stage. Paramedics in the wings started moving. Her band members froze in horror. But what happened in the next 20 seconds would become the most legendary performance moment in music history. If you've ever witnessed a moment that completely changed your understanding of what's possible, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about Whitney's incredible artistry. Because what those 20,000 people thought was a medical emergency was actually the most brilliant piece of performance art ever executed on a concert stage. And when Whitney rose from that floor and delivered what many consider the greatest live vocal performance ever recorded, she didn't just sing a song, she created a masterpiece that would be talked about for generations. It was October 28, 1994, at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Whitney Houston was in the middle of her I'm Your Baby Tonight world tour, and this particular show had been sold out for months. The audience was a mix of longtime devotees who had followed her since her gospel days at New Hope Baptist Church, newcomers who had fallen in love with the Bodyguard soundtrack, and music industry professionals who came to witness what everyone knew was the greatest voice of their generation. Whitney had already delivered 2 hours of pure vocal mastery. She had taken the crowd through her entire catalog, from the explosive energy of I Want to Dance with Somebody to the heart-wrenching vulnerability of Greatest Love of All. Every note had been perfect. Every run had been effortless. Every moment had showcased why she was called the Voice. But Whitney had been planning something special for this New York crowd, something that would push the boundaries of what a concert performance could be. She had been working with renowned choreographer Fatima Robinson for weeks on what they called the resurrection moment, a piece of theatrical artistry that would combine Whitney's unmatched vocal ability with dramatic storytelling that would leave audiences speechless. The idea had come to Whitney during a particularly emotional rehearsal session. She had been working on I Will Always Love You, the song that had become her signature and her burden, when she realized that audiences had become so accustomed to her perfection that they had forgotten she was human. They expected Whitney Houston to be invincible, untouchable, always powerful. But Whitney wanted to remind them, and herself, that her greatest strength came not from appearing superhuman, but from rising above human vulnerability. I want them to think they've lost me, Whitney had told Fatima during their planning sessions. I want them to feel what it would be like if the music stopped forever. And then I want to give them the most powerful moment of hope they've ever experienced. What Whitney was planning was unprecedented in live performance. No major artist had ever attempted to simulate a medical emergency as part of their show. The psychological impact on the audience, the technical coordination required, the sheer audacity of the concept. It was either going to be the most brilliant moment in concert history or the most disastrous. But Whitney Houston had never backed down from a challenge. This was the woman who had integrated the Country Music Awards, who had stood up to critics who said she wasn't black enough, who had proven that a gospel-trained voice could conquer every genre of music. If anyone could pull off such an ambitious piece of performance art, it was Whitney. The setup required military precision. Her sound engineers had to be prepared to cut the music at exactly the right moment. Her lighting technicians had to create the perfect dramatic atmosphere. Her security team had to be briefed on the plan so they wouldn't rush the stage in genuine concern. Even her band members were kept in the dark until the last moment to ensure their reactions would be authentic. Whitney had been building toward this moment throughout the entire evening. During Greatest Love of All, she had spoken to the audience about overcoming struggles and finding strength in vulnerability. During One Moment in Time, she had talked about how life could change in an instant and how we had to cherish every second of beauty we were given. Sometimes, Whitney had said to the crowd during a break between songs, her voice carrying that characteristic warmth that made 20,000 people feel like she was speaking directly to each of them. We don't appreciate what we have until we think we might lose it. Tonight, I want to share something with you about the power of resurrection, about coming back stronger than before. The audience had no idea they were about to become participants in the most elaborate piece of performance art in concert history. As Whitney began the opening notes of I Will Always Love You, the song that had spent 14 weeks at #1 and had become the best-selling single by a female artist in history, something seemed different. Her voice, usually so powerful and controlled, carried a note of vulnerability that was unusual even for this deeply emotional song. She was standing center stage in a flowing black gown that caught the spotlights beautifully, her hands moving gracefully as she interpreted the lyrics with her entire body. The audience was completely captivated, hanging on every note, every breath, every pause. But as Whitney reached the first chorus, something extraordinary happened. Instead of building to the powerful climax everyone expected, her voice began to soften, becoming more fragile with each phrase. She started moving more slowly, her gestures becoming less dramatic, her energy seeming to drain away before everyone's eyes. The band, following Whitney's secret instructions, began to slow the tempo slightly, the music becoming more sparse and haunting. The lighting gradually dimmed, creating an increasingly intimate and vulnerable atmosphere. Whitney continued singing, but now her voice was barely above a whisper, forcing the entire arena to lean forward and strain to hear every word. This was a vocal technique she had learned from her mother, Sissy, but she was using it in a way that created almost unbearable tension in the audience. As she approached the song's bridge, Whitney began to sway more dramatically, her movements becoming less controlled, more vulnerable. The audience started to sense that something unusual was happening, but they couldn't tell if it was part of the performance or something genuinely concerning. Then, as Whitney reached the line, I will always love you, her voice cracked, not with emotion, but with what sounded like genuine distress. She reached out toward the audience as if asking for help, her face showing what appeared to be real confusion and fear. The music continued, but Whitney's voice grew weaker and weaker. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on the microphone stand, and for a moment that lasted an eternity, 20,000 people held their breath, wondering if they were witnessing their idol in genuine medical distress. And then it happened. Whitney Houston, the woman whose voice had moved mountains, whose strength had inspired millions, whose presence commanded stages around the world, slowly sank to her knees center stage. Her hand released the microphone, which fell to the floor with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent arena. For several seconds, Whitney remained on her knees, her head bowed, completely still. The band continued playing the instrumental track, but without her voice, the music felt empty, incomplete, almost haunting. Then in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, Whitney gradually lowered herself completely to the stage floor, lying on her side in her flowing black gown, completely motionless. The silence that fell over Madison Square Garden was unlike anything anyone present had ever experienced. 20,000 people stopped breathing simultaneously. The band, following their instructions, continued playing the haunting instrumental, but the absence of Whitney's voice made the music feel like a funeral dirge. Security personnel, who had been briefed on the plan, began moving toward the stage, but slowly, as if they too were uncertain whether this was performance or reality. The lighting technicians dimmed the stage lights even further, creating an atmosphere that was both beautiful and terrifying. For 15 seconds that felt like 15 hours, Whitney Houston lay completely still on the Madison Square Garden stage, while 20,000 people processed what they thought they were witnessing. Some people in the audience began to cry. Others called out her name. A few started moving toward the exits, unable to bear watching their idol in distress. The psychological impact was overwhelming. In that moment, every person in the arena experienced the genuine terror of losing something precious and irreplaceable. They felt viscerally and completely what the world would be like without Whitney Houston's voice. But Whitney, even lying motionless on the stage floor, was counting every second, feeling the energy in the room, waiting for the exact right moment to deliver what would become the most powerful performance moment of her career. And then, as the instrumental track reached the point where the final verse should begin, something miraculous happened. Whitney's voice, soft but clear, began singing from her position on the stage floor. She wasn't moving, wasn't sitting up, but that incredible instrument was functioning perfectly. delivering the lyrics with a power and emotion that seemed impossible given her prone position. The effect on the audience was electric. People who had been crying with despair suddenly found themselves crying with relief and amazement. The woman they thought they had lost was not only alive, but singing more beautifully than ever. But Whitney wasn't finished. As her voice grew stronger, she slowly, gracefully began to rise. First to her knees, then to her feet, her voice building in power and intensity with each movement. By the time she was standing fully upright, microphone back in her hand, she was delivering the most powerful rendition of "I Will Always Love You" that anyone present had ever heard. What followed was 20 seconds of pure vocal mastery that defied every law of physics and human capability. Whitney's voice soared to heights that seemed impossible, hitting notes that registered not just in people's ears, but in their souls. The resurrection imagery was complete. She had died and been reborn, and her rebirth was more powerful than anything that had come before. The audience erupted in the loudest, most sustained applause in Madison Square Garden history. 20,000 people were on their feet, screaming, crying, and cheering with an intensity that shook the building's foundation. They had experienced death and resurrection, despair and hope, loss and recovery all in the span of 40 seconds. But Whitney wasn't done surprising them. As the applause continued, she walked to the edge of the stage and spoke directly to the audience, her voice now warm and intimate, carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "I wanted you to feel what I feel every time I walk onto a stage," Whitney said, her smile radiant and genuine. "The fear that maybe this time the voice won't be there, that maybe this will be the night the magic doesn't work. But I also wanted you to feel what happens when we rise above that fear, when we trust in something bigger than ourselves." The arena fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of 20,000 people hanging on every word from someone they had just watched die and be reborn. "Music isn't just about the notes we sing or the songs we perform," Whitney continued. "Music is about the connection between hearts, about the power to make people feel less alone in the world. And sometimes to remind people how precious that connection is, we have to show them what it feels like to almost lose it." What Whitney had accomplished in those 40 seconds was more than just a performance. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, artistic vision, and the power of live entertainment to create moments of genuine transcendence. The technical execution had been flawless. Her voice control, maintaining perfect pitch and tone while lying on the floor, demonstrated a level of professional skill that few performers in history could match. The dramatic timing, building tension for exactly the right amount of time before delivering the emotional release, showed an intuitive understanding of audience psychology that was almost supernatural. But more than the technical achievement, Whitney had created something deeper. She had reminded 20,000 people why live music mattered, why human connection was precious, and why art had the power to transform ordinary moments into experiences that would be remembered for a lifetime. The story of Whitney's resurrection performance spread through the music industry within hours. Video bootlegs of the moment became some of the most treasured recordings among music collectors. Fellow artists called it the most brilliant piece of performance art they had ever witnessed. Celine Dion, who was in the audience that night, later said, "Whitney didn't just sing that song, she became that song. She showed us what it really means to say, 'I will always love you' to an audience. She was willing to break their hearts to remind them how much they loved her." Barbra Streisand, another vocal legend, called the performance the most courageous thing I've ever seen an artist do on stage. Whitney risked everything: her reputation, her relationship with her audience, her own emotional well-being, to create a moment of pure artistic truth. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Whitney's mother, Whitney Houston, who had watched the performance from the wings. "That's my daughter," Sissy said through tears. "Not just the singer, not just the star, but the artist who understands that real power comes from being willing to be vulnerable in front of people who love you." The Madison Square Garden resurrection performance became a defining moment not just in Whitney's career, but in the history of live entertainment. It proved that concert performance could be more than just singing songs. It could be a form of theater, of emotional journey, of shared human experience that transcended the ordinary boundaries between performer and audience. Whitney performed "I Will Always Love You" thousands of times throughout her career, but everyone who was present that night in New York knew they had witnessed the definitive version, not because of its technical perfection, though it was flawless, but because of its emotional honesty and artistic courage. The performance also revealed something important about Whitney as an artist and as a person. Behind the glamour, the success, and the seemingly effortless perfection was a woman who understood deeply the fragility of life, the preciousness of connection, and the responsibility that came with possessing a gift that could move people so profoundly. In interviews years later, Whitney spoke about that night as one of the most important moments of her artistic life. "I learned something about trust that night," she said. "Trust in my voice, trust in my audience, and trust in the power of music to heal and transform. Sometimes you have to risk losing everything to discover what you really have." The technical aspects of the performance became legendary among vocal coaches and performance artists. The ability to maintain perfect breath control and vocal power while prone on a stage floor requires core strength and diaphragmatic control that few singers possess. Whitney's seamless transition from apparent helplessness to towering vocal power demonstrated a level of physical and emotional discipline that placed her in a category entirely her own. But beyond the technical achievement, the Madison Square Garden resurrection performance represented something deeper about Whitney Houston as an artist. It showed her willingness to use her extraordinary gifts not just to entertain, but to create experiences that challenged and transformed her audiences. Music critics struggled to find adequate language to describe what Whitney had accomplished. This wasn't just a concert performance, it was a piece of live theater, a psychological experiment, and a spiritual experience all rolled into one 40-second moment that would be remembered and discussed for decades. The performance also demonstrated Whitney's deep understanding of her own artistic legacy. She knew that audiences had come to expect perfection from her, that they saw her as superhuman rather than human. By showing them her vulnerability and then rising from it with even greater power, she reminded everyone, including herself, that true strength comes not from never falling, but from the ability to rise again. Today, the Madison Square Garden resurrection performance is studied in music schools as an example of how great artists can push the boundaries of their medium. It's analyzed by psychologists as a case study in the power of shared emotional experience. It's treasured by fans as the moment when they witnessed something that transcended entertainment and became art in its purest form. The bootleg recordings of that night, despite their imperfect audio quality, are considered among the most important live performance documents in music history. Not because they capture technical perfection, but because they preserve a moment when an artist risked everything to create something unprecedented and beautiful. Whitney Houston's willingness to make 20,000 people think they were losing her, just so she could remind them how much they loved her, represents the kind of artistic courage that separates true artists from mere entertainers. It was a gamble that could have backfired spectacularly, but Whitney's deep understanding of her audience and her own artistic vision turned it into one of the most memorable moments in live entertainment history. The 40 seconds when 20,000 people thought Whitney Houston was dying, followed by 20 seconds of the most powerful singing anyone present had ever heard, proved that great art requires great risks. Whitney Houston was willing to break hearts to heal them, to create fear to deliver hope, and to simulate death to celebrate life. Sometimes the most beautiful music happens not when everything goes according to plan, but when an artist is brave enough to venture into uncharted territory and trust that their gifts and their audience will meet them there. Whitney Houston's resurrection performance at Madison Square Garden was a reminder that music at its highest level isn't just about entertainment, it's about transformation. If this incredible story of artistic courage and the power of live performance moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who understands that the greatest artists are those willing to risk everything to create something unforgettable. Have you ever witnessed a performance that completely changed your understanding of what was possible? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments when music transcended entertainment and became pure magic.